Hi, welcome to One Eye on the Page. I am Scott. It's 2024. I have done the worst of 2023, and now it's time for the best of 2023. So let's go ahead and get started. When I'm going through this list, you may notice if you've watched patch videos that there are some books that I praised that aren't on this list, as I have had time to think about it and done a little reflection, and also books that I thought were really good at the time, but then I read other books in that genre. Those initial books kind of went down a little bit. Didn't become bad books, but they weren't the top tier books that I originally thought they were going to be. The biggest victims of this, I guess, would be Emily Henry books. There were two books that when I did my ranking of the books, just based on the score that I gave them, they were initially, I believe, 17 and 18. Upon reflection, I just couldn't keep them in there. But I think, hi, watch. I think that three of the four Emily Henry books I read are still good. I think they would still be 4 stars. One of them maybe dipped below 4 stars. Meanwhile, the other Emily Henry book that I read, Happy Place, is bad. Not bad enough to be on my worst list, but it was just not a good book at all. So, books that I may have praised, maybe lower down, books that maybe I at the time didn't necessarily give as much praise. Although every book that I have on this list is a book that I did like. I did rate it 4 stars or above. So let's go and get started. Book number 23. Book number 23 is Saint Mick by Mick Foley. It is one of the books that I read in December, Christmas related. Foley is a former professional wrestler who, in the book, talks a little bit about his retirement that he had to do basically because of injuries, what he did afterward, including volunteering for rain and becoming a Santa Claus, which a large portion of this book is about. Mick Foley has a great love of Christmas, has a Christmas room all year round. So becoming Santa Claus makes sense. And as with previous books that he has written, I believe, 4 memoirs plus quite a few children's books and a couple of novels, I believe. I haven't read all the children's book and I haven't read one of the novels. I have read all the memoirs, including Have a Nice Day, which I think is the best wrestler autobiography that there is. So Mick is a great writer, knows how to tell a story. Also, it makes you laugh, makes you cry. I won't say that every Mick Foley book that I've read has been the best. His last 2 memoirs were, and he admits it himself, weren't necessarily the best, but when he's on, he's on. So it's a very good book. Book number 22 is Starter Villain by John Scalzi. This is the only book by Scalzi I read this year. Last year, I read, I believe, 7 books. I still have books in the Old Man War saga that I need to read. I just haven't gotten around to them. I don't know that I'm going to enjoy them as much as I did the previous books. I really enjoyed the first 3 books I read in the series. I just, because characters move on, don't know how I feel about going into that. It is funny. John Scalzi can write straight fiction, hard science fiction, but he also has the ability to just be really humorous. And this one is about a man who inherits basically his uncle's villain out, outfit, his villain compound, and is to continue on his villain tasks. He also has a talking cat who helps him. As far as substance, it's probably lacking a little bit in substance as compared to some of the other books that are on this list, but it's just a fun read. I am hoping that there is a sequel, that there's room left in this for to be a sequel. So I look forward to reading that if that's the case. Book number 21 is Stars Collide by Rachel Lacey. It is a sapphic romance. I talked about the Emily Henry books earlier, which started me on reading some romances. I have discovered that the romances that I enjoy the most are the sapphic ones. Well, because most heterosexual romances, the male character is often portrayed in a way where I'm like, I don't know why you're with him. You shouldn't be with him. He's an abusive person. And at least the sapphic romances that I've read are not that case. I don't necessarily always think that the people should be together, but I'm not just pulling my hair out, not that I can afford it, about how you're with an abusive person. But this one was just really fun. It's not the first Rachel Lacey book I read. Honestly, the first one I read, I'm like, I don't know if she's for me. It wasn't another one that wasn't the worst book of the year or on the worst list, but it was it was kind of meh. But this one was really fun. Two music artists, a little bit difference in age. One's a little bit older than the other one. They go on tour together. A romance develops. It's kind of grumpy sunshine, even though not really grumpy. Definitely sunshine. It's just a fun read. I ended up reading several Rachel Lacey books because of this one. I can't remember why I read this one after reading the first one because it was kind of like, I don't know, not for me. But just a great read. Book number 20 is Thank You for Listening by Julia Whelan. Julia Whelan was an actress. I don't know if she still does acting, but she was an actress, was on the TV show Once and Again, is quite well known for being an audiobook narrator, and she has written at least a couple of books. This one is her second. I have not read her first one. It is a romance between two audiobook narrators. I had this much higher up on my list, but having many months since I've read this, it doesn't stick with me as much as other books have. So that's the main reason I brought it down. I really like the female main character. Very interesting. She's an audiobook narrator who used to be an actress, kind of like Julie Whelan, but not like Whelan. She is not an actress because she had an accident that physically, changed her. And she was very interesting. I don't think the male main character is particularly interesting, but bonus point, he's not abusive, which that's that's a plus for me now in heterosexual romances. Hey, the guy wasn't abusive. Points. But yeah, it's written very well. It just doesn't stick with me quite as much as I would have wanted to. I don't have it on here, but there's another book, a romance called Double Puck by Lauren Blakely that I don't necessarily believe is written as well, but it's probably the romance I remember the best, and it's not just because it's a woman having a relationship with two hockey players and they both know about it, but it's much more memorable to me than this one is. This one's definitely much better written. It just, the story itself doesn't resonate as well. Book number 19, Tonal Shift, Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes, uh, 1,000+ page book, or at least the edition I have looked up. There's faults in it. I think it gets really repetitious, especially in the first half. Don Quixote is actually two novels that are put together. The second novel is, I think, was written at least 10 years later, possibly more. I'm not sure about the exact timing now, but the first part is just really repetitious. It's almost a Tom and Jerry cartoon. Uh, Don Quixote does his stuff, gets his ass kicked, goes out, does stuff, gets his ass kicked. There's a little bit more variety to the second half. If I were ranking these by halves, the second half probably be closer up to the top 10. I don't think in the top 10 because I didn't particularly like the ending. I thought in 1,000-page book that the ending was a little bit rushed, but I don't think the first half would be in the top 20. Book number 18 is The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. It is about the year after her husband dies. It's a reflection on grief, and I think particularly when she's talking about those months like directly after he died, it really resonates. It's stuff that I've gone through myself. Her daughter is in the hospital. It doesn't happen in the book, but before the book is published, her daughter actually dies. I think as the book goes on, it loses a little impact because as you get a little bit further away from the death, I think it's still there, but it just doesn't impact you quite the same way. It's grief. I think it's a bit quieter grief, and people who aren't feeling it don't necessarily understand it, even though it can sometimes still be as heavy for you as I think it was for her in the book. It's just I didn't connect with it as much, but it was still there. Book number 17 is Imogene, obviously, by Becky Albertini, I believe. It is another sapphic romance. This time it's a college student or Imogene who's about to go into college next year. She is 18. She is straight, or so she believes. She has a gay best friend. Her sister's gay. She has started a gay straight alliance at her school. She goes to visit her best friend at college and meets one of her friends there who is a woman and starts to develop feelings that she had not really expected to. And it's a little bit of exploration of that, the different attitudes that people have, and even like there's a character in here I really dislike who's a bit of a gatekeeper, and we have run into that type of person in all types of life where you are something or you do something, you believe something, there's somebody there who says no, you have to do it this way, and this is the way you have to do it, and if you don't do it this way, then you're not part of our group. For the most part, everybody is accepting in this novel, and it's a lot of just Imogene questioning herself in being influenced by this person who is gatekeeping and just doubting herself. The only book number 16 is Carry On Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse. Well, this will not be the only P.G. Wodehouse you will see on this list. I will point out that I read 39 P.G. Wodehouse books this year, so obviously there are going to be a few on this list at least. Carry On Jeeves is one of the short story collections. P.G. Wodehouse published, I believe, 4 short story collections of Jeeves and Wooster before he moved on to novels. And he went novels from there on out. Now, I will freely admit, I like the novels much more than I like the short story collections. But this is a pretty good one. It's basically our first introduction to Jeeves, or at least it includes stories that are our first introduction to Jeeves and Wooster. We also get one short story from Jeeves' point of view, which explains why every other story we get from Wooster, because Jeeves is not a great narrator and perhaps not as likable a character as he is in other stories when you can kind of see how he thinks. So, but it's still a very good book. Book number 15 is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I started reading this book, and I got to be quite honest, I did not think I was going to like it. I hesitated to continue reading it because it was a bit off putting, much like Eleanor herself is off putting. I will say, if you haven't read it and you go into it, just give Eleanor a chance. Uh, Eleanor is a strange woman, and she is perhaps on the spectrum. She has had a bit of tragedy in her life, and something that I do like in here that's different than a lot of the other books I read is that there is a man woman relationship in here that's platonic, and it doesn't ever move past platonic. There's a little bit of suggestion that there might be something, but it pulls it back, and it's a very good book. When you give it a chance, give it a chance. Book number 14 is Uneasy Money by P.G. Wodehouse. Uh, a man is the beneficiary of a will of a man he helped once. The man does not give his money to his relatives, and the man who receives it goes to those relatives because he feels uncomfortable and he wants to help them. And there's just a little bit of comedy of errors because he goes there, finds out that he is kind of seen as a horrible person by these people. So he doesn't say who he is, but he still tries to help. And a little bit of comedy errors. One of the better romances in P.G. Wodehouse books, I think, mainly because a lot of it is not letting the person know who he actually is. So it's not the typical Woodhouse man, basically like, I just met you, I love you, marry me now, which happens more than it should. Number 13 is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. Caveat for me, I think the short story is better. I do feel like some of the novel is padding, but it's still a very good novel despite the padding. It's still heartbreaking. I don't know that Charlie is perhaps quite as likable as he was in the short story, but I don't think that him being a little bit unlikable at portions throughout this story is a bad thing. It's a great novel that I don't think needed to be a novel. Book number 12 is Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. This book has been in my house for a long time. I've never read it, never seen the movie or the TV series. I think there's a TV series. And I just picked it up, read the book. The book is great. The book is part of a series. I've read two other books in the series. The second one was good. The third one was not good. And there are other books. I don't think I'm going to continue. I don't think I'm going to continue to read them. But this book on its own about Anne, who's just a little ball of sunshine despite being an orphan, and despite going to a town because the family there wanted a boy that could work on their farm, but she's mistakenly sent there and they decide to keep her, and she's just a delight. And I think that's part of the problem with the rest of the series is that she's, I think, well, she ages like 8 or 9, I think, till like 13 or 14 throughout this book, and she's a teenager and adult in the other books, and she loses some of her sunshine. And I mean, in the other books, also, it it gets more adult uh, as far as just like things that happen in the adult world and work and death and stuff. Although death does happen in here and it's very sad, it's just not quite the same. But this one I'd probably go back and read at some point. The other books I don't think I'll ever read again or finish up the series. Book number 11 is Red Hot and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. It's a gay romance between the son of the American president and a British prince. It's a friends to lovers story. I just thought it was really fun. Most of the characters in here are likable. The only one being Zara. Zara, a very unlikable character, very mean character, I think, for no reason. But other than that, I like pretty much every character. I like the plot line through. I have not seen the whole movie. I started it, but I didn't finish it. I think the actors were good for the movie. I do think some of the changes made in it I didn't enjoy. I do tend to be a little bit more of a purist when it comes to adaptations, though. Book number 9 is Hot Water by P.G. Woodhouse. Hot Water is just almost pure comedy. Uh, a decent romance. I like both members of the romance, which is not always the case with P.G. Woodhouse's books. But really, it's a comic caper where it just keeps building up and building up and building up. Just and all the side characters are great. An almost perfect PG Woodhouse book. I do think there are a couple more that I read last year that are better than this. Book number 9 is Holly by Stephen King. If you're going to enjoy this, a lot of it depends on your point of view about Holly Gibney. If you don't know who Holly Gibney is, you probably don't want to read this one anyways, because you should read other books first, at least the Finders Keeper trilogy, the Mr. Mercedes, Finders Keepers, and End of Watch. She also appears in The Outsider and in the novella If It Bleeds, in the book If It Bleeds, which I don't think those last two are necessary for you to read this book, but I do think the trilogy is. I like Holly well enough. She's not my favorite character, but I don't have the dislike for her that many people do. The two bad guys in here are a couple of married professors in like their 80s who are serial killers. There's a reason for their serial killing. If it makes sense to you, that's kind of up to you. I bought it and also didn't buy it, but in a way that I bought it, which I can't really explain without spoiling it for you. I liked it. A big problem that some people have is that there's a lot of talk about COVID and a lot of talk about Donald Trump, but this is set in 2021 and that stuff happened then. So, but if that bothers you, this is not the book for you. I think it's a great read. Probably one of his better books that he's written recently, which I'm looking at the shelf right now. I I'm actually pretty happy with most of his releases recently. I think Billy Summers is one that didn't quite work for me, but his other ones, all his other novels at least, I think work pretty well. Book number 8 is The Marlowe Murder Club by Robert Thorogood. It's just a fun mystery with a trio of people you wouldn't expect to be detective. A woman like her in her 70s, a dog walker, and a parson's wife. But unlike a lot of mysteries that I encounter, these detectives who aren't actually detectives do have skills and they do solve the crime. Whereas a lot of the non-detective detectives that I read stumble around uh, the solution, but don't necessarily get it on their own. Uh, there's also a lot of backstory to each of these characters that's very interesting. Well, also the mystery itself is great, and the solution. Although I do have to say, I did figure out, but I don't think it was necessarily. It doesn't make it a bad solution. I will say that there is a sequel. The sequel is not as good. If there's a third book that comes out, I will read it, but I'm hoping it's more on the level of this than the sequel. And I can't think of the sequel's name at the moment. Death Comes Tomorrow, I believe. Book number 7 is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a long book. It's a laborious book. It's a main character that I just want to quite a bit, but it just drags me in all the time. It I want to just this guy around, but I also still feel for him. What really? Or we're replacing cats? And I'm actually thinking of reading some more Dostoevsky. I am I'm setting some goals for reading this year, which I'm probably going to regret. So I'm not going to talk about them in case I fail miserably. But I am thinking of reading some more of him. Book number 6 is Animal Farm by George Orwell. Actually, the first time that I've read this book, it is basically an allegory for the Russian Revolution. I'm going to put this cat down. No, go away. No, go away. Go away. Animal Farm, uh, short little fable, just heartbreaking and funny at some point. And this is one of the books that I read it. I don't know that I'll necessarily read it again. I might. There's another book that's higher up on the list that I will not read again, even though it's close to the top for me. Uh, but it sticks with me. Book number 5 is Quick Service, which is in the book The Most of P.G. Wodehouse by P.G. Wodehouse. Quick Service is the first P.G. Wodehouse book that I read last year when I started to read all the P.G. Wodehouse books. Another one, a standalone novel that's basically a comic caper where it ends up with a bunch of people are in this house trying to steal portraits, trying to steal fiancés, uh, trying to catch burglars who are not the people that you think they are, butlers who are jealous because they think other people are hitting on their fiance. It just, I think as much as I love Jeeves and Wooster and the Blandings Castle books, there's just something about these standalone, basically just comic capers, where, as I said with Hot Water, just building and building and building, that just works so well. Book number 4 is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This is one of the books. There's one more that I'm never going to read again. It's an excellent book set basically in a correctional facility, I believe in the 50s, where young black men, boys, are abused and sometimes killed. And it's a story of one young man, his journey there, and what happened to him when he was there. It's just heartbreaking. It's based on a true story. Excellent read. A read that's going to stick with me, and one that I will not read again. You should at least read it once, though. Book number 3 is Kiss Her Once for Me by Alison Cochrane. This is a sapphic romance. She is also the writer of The Charm Offensive, which I read last year as part of my family's book club. It was recommended by my daughter Robin. This is the best type of book. It's fun, it's entertaining, it's cheesy. It's essentially a Hallmark Christmas story, but one that is written so well that you are just able to sink into the cheesiness of it. Anytime Alison Cochrane comes out with a book, I'm going to read it. Both of the ones that I've read have been excellent. And I will go from the tonal change of going from the Nickel Boys to Alison Cochrane to go from Alison Cochrane to Night by Eli Vessel at number 2. This is the other one that I just will not read again. Obviously, he's a Holocaust survivor. This is about his time in the concentration camp with his father. This just covers him and his father because he is separated from his mother and sisters. And at that point in the book, we just go with them. We do not know what happened to his mother and sisters in the book. He has other books about this, which I don't know if I'm going to read because it was hard reading this one. It's a very short book, but it's also heartbreaking and heartrending. And I'm glad I read it, and I will never read it again. Which brings us to book number 1, which is Frozen Assets by P.G. Wodehouse. What I've said about most of the other Wodehouse books in here, Comic Caper, the relationship here is the guy does basically fall in love with the woman at first sight, and she does have a fiance that we all dislike. But one thing I like about this more than a lot of other P.G. Wodehouse novels is that Jerry, the essentially the main character, his friend Biff, who is the brother to the woman he is in love with, they're actually friends. They act like friends. They care about each other and they think each other are pretty great. And you know, they do occasionally make the insulting remark, but it's an occasional thing, and it's not the type of thing where you're like, oh, you two don't like each other at all. Also, there is a character in here that doesn't really appear until about 3/4 of the way in the book, and he is just one of my favorite Wodehouse characters. He makes the book for me after not being in it through most of the book. He's a lawyer with stomach issues who used to do theater when he was a younger man, and it's just this would have still been a great book without him, but it's just ridiculous how much better he makes this book. I originally had one of the other Woodhouse books at number one, but Mr. Bunting in here made this one go to the top. So that is my top 23 of 2023. I expect next year will include more Woodhouse. I will be reading at least 12 Woodhouse books, probably more as I do my 5-year battle PG Woodhouse. But I don't know what else I have going on. I do know that I'm going to try to read better books. If I encounter a book that I don't like, I'm going to try to force myself to DNF things and not get to the point where I have something that I rate a 1 or a half a star or a 0 star. If you haven't read any of these books, check them out. Hope you like. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and I will talk to you next time.